Astrology is the study of the movements and relative positions of celestial objects as a means for divining information about human affairs and terrestrial events. Astrology has been dated to at least the 2nd millennium BCE, and has its roots in calendrical systems used to predict seasonal shifts and to interpret celestial cycles as signs of divine communications. Many cultures have attached importance to astronomical events, and some, such as the Indians, Chinese, and Maya, developed elaborate systems for predicting terrestrial events from celestial observations. Western astrology, one of the oldest astrological systems still in use, can trace its roots to 19th–17th century BCE Mesopotamia, from which it spread to ancient Greece, Rome, the Arab world, and eventually Central and Western Europe. Contemporary Western astrology is often associated with systems of horoscopes that purport to explain aspects of a person's personality and predict significant events in their lives based on the positions of celestial objects. The majority of professional astrologers rely on such systems. Throughout most of its history, astrology was considered a scholarly tradition and was common in academic circles, often in close relation with astronomy, alchemy, meteorology, and medicine. It was present in political circles, and is mentioned in various works of literature, from Dante Alighieri and Geoffrey Chaucer to William Shakespeare, Lope de Vega and Calderon de la Barca. With the onset of the scientific revolution, astrology was called into question. It has been challenged successfully both on theoretical and experimental grounds, and has been shown to have no scientific validity or explanatory power. Astrology thus lost its academic and theoretical standing, and common belief in it has largely declined. Astrology is now recognized to be pseudoscience. Etymology. The word astrology comes from the early Latin word astrologia, which derives from the Greek sigma tau omicron lambda omicron gamma iota alpha, from sigma tau omicron nu astron and lambda omicron gamma iota alpha logia. Astrologia later passed into meaning star divination, with astronomia used for the scientific term history. Many cultures have attached importance to astronomical events, and the Indians, Chinese, and Maya developed elaborate systems for predicting terrestrial events from celestial observations. In the West, astrology most often consists of a system of horoscopes purporting to explain aspects of a person's personality and predict future events in their life based on the positions of the sun, moon, and other celestial objects at the time of the birth. The majority of professional astrologers rely on such systems. Astrology has been dated to at least the 2nd millennium BCE, with roots in calendrical systems used to predict seasonal shifts and to interpret celestial cycles as signs of divine communications. A form of astrology was practiced in the first dynasty of Mesopotamia. Chinese astrology was elaborated in the Zhou dynasty. Hellenistic astrology after 332 BCE mixed Babylonian astrology with Egyptian decanic astrology in Alexandria, creating horoscopic astrology. Alexander the Great's conquest of Asia allowed astrology to spread to ancient Greece and Rome. In Rome, astrology was associated with Chaldean wisdom. After the conquest of Alexandria in the 7th century, astrology was taken up by Islamic scholars, and Hellenistic texts were translated into Arabic and Persian. In the 12th century, Arabic texts were imported to Europe and translated into Latin. Major astronomers including Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler and Galileo practiced as court astrologers. Astrological references appear in literature in the works of poets such as Dante Alighieri and Geoffrey Chaucer. and of playwrights such as Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare. Throughout most of its history, astrology was considered a scholarly tradition. It was accepted in political and academic contexts, and was connected with other studies, such as astronomy, alchemy, meteorology, and medicine. At the end of the 17th century, new scientific concepts in astronomy and physics called astrology into question. Astrology thus lost its academic and theoretical standing, and common belief in astrology has largely declined. Ancient world astrology, in its broadest sense, is the search for meaning in the sky. Early evidence for humans making conscious attempts to measure, record, and predict seasonal changes by reference to astronomical cycles appears as markings on bones and cave walls, which show that lunar cycles were being noted as early as 25,000 years ago. This was a first step towards recording the moon's influence upon tides and rivers, and towards organizing a communal calendar. Farmers addressed agricultural needs with increasing knowledge of the constellations that appear in the different seasons, and used the rising of particular star groups to herald annual floods or seasonal activities. By the 3rd millennium BCE, civilizations had sophisticated awareness of celestial cycles, and may have oriented temples in alignment with heliacal risings of the stars. Scattered evidence suggests that the oldest known astrological references are copies of texts made in the ancient world. The Venus tablet of Ammisaduqa, thought to be compiled in Babylon around 1700 BCE. A scroll documenting an early use of electional astrology is doubtfully ascribed to the reign of the Sumerian ruler Gudea of Lagash. This describes how the gods revealed to him in a dream the constellations that would be most favorable for the planned construction of a temple. However, there is controversy about whether these were genuinely recorded at the time or merely ascribed to ancient rulers by posterity. The oldest undisputed evidence of the use of astrology as an integrated system of knowledge is therefore attributed to the records of the first dynasty of Mesopotamia. This astrology had some parallels with Hellenistic Greek astrology, including the zodiac, a norming point near 9 degrees in Aries, the trine aspect, planetary exaltations, and the dodecatomoria. The Babylonians viewed celestial events as possible signs rather than as causes of physical events. The system of Chinese astrology was elaborated during the Zhou dynasty and flourished during the Han dynasty, during which all the familiar elements of traditional Chinese culture, the yin-yang philosophy, theory of the 5 elements, heaven and earth, Confucian morality, were brought together to formalize the philosophical principles of Chinese medicine and divination, astrology and alchemy. Ancient objections. Cicero stated the twins objection, later developed by St. Augustine. He argued that since the other planets are much more distant from the Earth than the Moon, they could have only very tiny influence compared to the Moon's. He also argued that if astrology explains everything about a person's fate, then it wrongly ignores the visible effect of inherited ability and parenting, changes in health worked by medicine, or the effects of the weather on people. Plotinus argued that since the fixed stars are much more distant than the planets, it is laughable to imagine the planet's effect on mankind should depend on the position with respect to the zodiac. He also argues that the interpretation of the moon's conjunction with a planet as good when the moon is full, but bad when the moon is waning, is clearly wrong, as from the moon's point of view, half of her surface is always in sunlight, and from the planet's point of view, waning should be better, as then the planet sees some light from the moon, but when the moon is full to us, it is dark, and therefore bad, on the side facing the planet. Favorinus argued that it was absurd to imagine that stars and planets would affect human bodies in the same way as they affect the tides, and equally absurd that small motions in the heavens cause large changes in people's fates. Sextus Empiricus argued that it was absurd to link human attributes with myths about the signs of the zodiac. Carneades argued that belief in fate denies free will and morality, that people born at different times can all die in the same accident or battle, and that contrary to uniform influences from the stars, tribes and cultures are all different. Hellenistic Egypt. In 525 BCE, Egypt was conquered by the Persians. The 1st century BCE Egyptian Dendera zodiac shares two signs, the Balance and the Scorpion, with Mesopotamian astrology. With the occupation by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE, Egypt became Hellenistic. The city of Alexandria was founded by Alexander after the conquest, becoming the place where Babylonian astrology was mixed with Egyptian decanic astrology to create horoscopic astrology. This contained the Babylonian zodiac with its system of planetary exaltations, the triplicities of the signs and the importance of eclipses. It used the Egyptian concept of dividing the zodiac into 36 decans of 10 degrees each, with an emphasis on the rising decan, and the Greek system of planetary gods, sign rulership and 4 elements. 2nd century BCE texts predict positions of planets in zodiac signs at the time of the rising of certain decans, particularly Sothis. The astrologer and astronomer Ptolemy lived in Alexandria. Ptolemy's work, the Tetrabiblos, formed the basis of Western astrology, and enjoyed almost the authority of a Bible among the astrological writers of 1,000 years or more. Greece and Rome. The conquest of Asia by Alexander the Great exposed the Greeks to ideas from Syria, Babylon, Persia and Central Asia. Around 280 BCE, Berosus, a priest of Bel from Babylon, moved to the Greek island of Kos, teaching astrology and Babylonian culture. By the 1st century BCE, there were two varieties of astrology, one using horoscopes to describe the past, present and future, the other, theurgy, emphasizing the soul's ascent to the stars. Greek influence played a crucial role in the transmission of astrological theory to Rome. The first definite reference to astrology in Rome comes from the orator Cato, who in 160 BCE warned farm overseers against consulting with Chaldeans, who were described as Babylonian stargazers. Among both Greeks and Romans, Babylonia became so identified with astrology that Chaldean wisdom became synonymous with divination using planets and stars. The 2nd century Roman poet and satirist Juvenal complains about the pervasive influence of Chaldeans, saying, "Still more trusted of the Chaldeans, every word uttered by the astrologer they will believe has come from Hamon's fountain." One of the first astrologers to bring Hermetic astrology to Rome was Thrasyllus, astrologer to the Emperor Tiberius, the first emperor to have had a court astrologer, though his predecessor Augustus had used astrology to help legitimize his imperial rights. Medieval world. Hindu. The main texts upon which classical Indian astrology is based are early medieval compilations, notably the Parasara Horasastra, and Saravali by Kalyaranavarma. The Horasastra is a composite work of 71 chapters, of which the first part dates to the 7th to early 8th centuries and the second part to the later 8th century. The Saravali likewise dates to around 800 CE. English translations of these texts were published by N. Krishna around V. Beach Chowdhury in 1963 and 1961, respectively. Islamic astrology was taken up by Islamic scholars following the collapse of Alexandria to the Arabs in the 7th century, and the founding of the Abbasid Empire in the 8th. The second Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mansur, founded the city of Baghdad to act as a center of learning, and included in its design a library translation center known as Bayt al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom, which continued to receive development from his heirs and was to provide a major impetus for Arabic-Persian translations of Hellenistic astrological texts. The early translators included Mashallah, who helped to elect the time for the foundation of Baghdad, and Sahl ibn Bish, whose texts were directly influential upon later European astrologers such as Guido Bonatti in the 13th century, and William Lilly in the 17th century. Knowledge of Arabic texts started to become imported into Europe during the Latin translations of the 12th century. The first astrological book published in Europe was the Liber Planetae Mundi Climatibus, which appeared between 1010 and 1027 AD, and may have been authored by Gerbert of Aurillac. Ptolemy's 2nd century AD Tetrabiblos was translated into Latin by Plato of Tivoli in 1138. The Dominican theologian Thomas Aquinas followed Aristotle in proposing that the stars ruled the imperfect, sublunary body, while attempting to reconcile astrology with Christianity by stating that God ruled the soul. The 13th century mathematician Campanus of Navarra is said to have devised a system of astrological houses that divides the prime vertical into houses of equal 30 degrees arcs. Though the system was used earlier in the East, the 13th century astronomer Guido Bonatti wrote a textbook, the Liber Astronomicus, a copy of which King Henry VII of England owned at the end of the 15th century. In Paradiso, the final part of the Divine Comedy, the Italian poet Dante Alighieri referred, in countless details, to the astrological planets, though he adapted traditional astrology to suit his Christian viewpoint, for example using astrological thinking in his prophecies of the reform of Christendom. Medieval objections in the 7th century. Isidore of Seville argued in his Etymologiae that astronomy described the movements of the heavens, while astrology had two parts. One was scientific, describing the movements of the sun, the moon and the stars, while the other, making predictions, was theologically erroneous. In contrast, John Gower in the 14th century defined astrology as essentially limited to the making of predictions. The influence of the stars was in turn divided into natural astrology, with for example effects on tides and the growth of plants, and judicial astrology, with supposedly predictable effects on people. The 14th century skeptic Nicole Orsma, however, included astronomy as a part of astrology in his Livre de Divinations. Orsma argued that current approaches to prediction of events such as plagues, wars, and weather were inappropriate, but that such prediction was a valid field of inquiry. However, he attacked the use of astrology to choose the timing of actions as wholly false, and rejected the determination of human action by the stars on grounds of free will. The friar Lawrence Pignon similarly rejected all forms of divination and determinism, including by the stars, in his 1411 Contre les Divineurs. This was in opposition to the tradition carried by the Arab astronomer Al-Bumazar, whose Introductorium in Astronomium and a Magnus Conjunctionibus argued the view that both individual actions and larger-scale history are determined by the stars. Renaissance and early modern Renaissance scholars commonly practiced astrology. Gerolamo Cardano cast the horoscope of King Edward VI of England, while John Dee was the personal astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I of England. Catherine de' Medici paid Michael Nostradamus in 1566 to verify the prediction of the death of her husband, King Henry II of France, made by her astrologer Lucas Gauricus. Major astronomers who practiced as court astrologers included Tycho Brahe in the royal court of Denmark, Johannes Kepler to the Habsburgs, Galileo Galilei to the Medici, and Giordano Bruno, who was burnt at the stake for heresy in Rome in 1600. The distinction between astrology and astronomy was not entirely clear. Advances in astronomy were often motivated by the desire to improve the accuracy of astrology. Ephemerides with complex astrological calculations, and almanacs interpreting celestial events for use in medicine and for choosing times to plant crops, were popular in Elizabethan England. In 1597, the English mathematician and physician Thomas Hood made a set of paper instruments that used revolving overlays to help students work out relationships between fixed stars or constellations, the midheaven, and the 12 astrological houses. Hood's instruments also illustrated, for pedagogical purposes, the supposed relationships between the signs of the zodiac, the planets, and the parts of the human body adherents believed were governed by the planets and signs. While Hood's presentation was innovative, his astrological information was largely standard and was taken from Gerard Mercator's astrological disc made in 1551, or a source used by Mercator. English astrology had reached its zenith by the 17th century. Astrologers were theorists, researchers, and social engineers, as well as providing individual advice to everyone from monarchs downwards. Among other things, astrologers could advise on the best time to take a journey, a harvest, a crop, diagnose and prescribe for physical or mental illnesses, and predict natural disasters. This underpinned a system in which everything, people, the world, the universe, was understood to be interconnected, and astrology coexisted happily with religion, magic and science. Enlightenment period and onwards. During the Enlightenment, intellectual sympathy for astrology fell away, leaving only a popular following supported by cheap almanacs. One English almanac compiler, Richard Saunders, followed the spirit of the age by printing a derisive discourse on the invalidity of astrology, while in France Pierre Bayle's dictionary of 1697 stated that the subject was puerile. The Anglo-Irish satirist Jonathan Swift ridiculed the Whig political astrologer John Partridge. Astrology saw a popular revival starting in the 19th century, as part of a general revival of spiritualism and, later, New Age philosophy, and through the influence of mass media such as newspaper horoscopes. Early in the 20th century, the psychiatrist Carl Jung developed some concepts concerning astrology, which led to the development of psychological astrology. Principles and practice. Advocates have defined astrology as a symbolic language, an art form of science, and a method of divination. Though most cultural astrology systems share common roots in ancient philosophies that influenced each other, many use methods that differ from those in the West. These include Hindu astrology and Chinese astrology, both of which have influenced the world's cultural history. Western astrology is a form of divination based on the construction of a horoscope for an exact moment, such as a person's birth. It uses the tropical zodiac, which is aligned to the equinoctial points. Western astrology is founded on the movements and relative positions of celestial bodies such as the sun, moon and planets, which are analyzed by the movement through signs of the zodiac and by their aspects relative to one another. They are also considered by the placement in houses. Astrology's modern representation in Western popular media is usually reduced to sun sign astrology, which considers only the zodiac sign of the sun at an individual's date of birth, and represents only 1/12 of the total chart. The horoscope visually expresses the set of relationships for the time and place of the chosen event. These relationships are between the 7 planets, signifying tendencies such as war and love, the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the 12 houses. Each planet is in a particular sign and a particular house at the chosen time, when observed from the chosen place, creating 2 kinds of relationship. A third kind is the aspect of each planet to every other planet, where, for example, 2 planets 120 degrees apart are in a harmonious relationship, but 2 planets 90 degrees apart are in a conflicted relationship. Together these relationships and their interpretations supposedly form the language of the heavens speaking to learned men. Along with tarot divination, astrology is one of the core studies of Western esotericism, and as such has influenced systems of magical belief not only among Western esotericists and hermeticists, but also belief systems such as Wicca that have borrowed from or been influenced by the Western esoteric tradition. Tanya Lerman has said that all magicians know something about astrology, and refers to a table of correspondences in Starhawk's The Spiral Dance, organized by planet, as an example of the astrological law studied by magicians. Hindu. The earliest Vedic texts on astronomy is the Vedama Jyotisha. Vedic thought later came to include astrology as well. Hindu natal astrology originated with Hellenistic astrology by the 3rd century BCE, though incorporating the Hindu lunar mansions, the names of the signs, the planets, and astrological terms in Varaha Mihira's texts are considered conclusive evidence of a Greek origin for Hindu astrology. The Indian techniques may also have been augmented with some of the Babylonian techniques. Chinese and East Asian. Chinese astrology has a close relation with Chinese philosophy and uses concepts such as yin and yang, the 5 phases, the 10 celestial stems, the 12 earthly branches, and Shichen. The early use of Chinese astrology was mainly confined to political astrology, the observation of unusual phenomena, identification of portents, and the selection of auspicious days for events and decisions. The constellations of the zodiac of Western Asia and Europe were not used. Instead, the sky is divided into 3 enclosures, and 28 mansions in 12 CI. The Chinese zodiac of 12 animal signs is said to represent 12 different types of personality. It is based on cycles of years, lunar months, and 2-hour periods of the day. The zodiac traditionally begins with the sign of the rat, and the cycle proceeds through 11 other animal signs: the ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake, horse, goat, monkey, rooster, dog, and pig. Complex systems of predicting fate and destiny based on one's birthday, birth season, and birth hours, such as zipping and ziwei dao shu, are still used regularly in modern-day Chinese astrology. They do not rely on direct observations of the stars. The Korean zodiac is identical to the Chinese one. The Vietnamese zodiac is almost identical to Chinese zodiac, except the second animal is the water buffalo instead of the ox, and the 4th animal is the cat instead of the rabbit. The Japanese have since 1873 celebrated the beginning of the new year on the 1st of January as per the Gregorian calendar. The Thai zodiac begins not a Chinese New Year, but either on the first day of 5th month in the Thai lunar calendar, or during the Songkran festival, depending on the purpose of the use.